The country you're living in is not the same one you grew up in. The changes happening in America are getting harder to ignore. And I need you to hear this before it's too late. 47% of Americans can no longer afford basic necessities. 1 in 6 households can't pay their energy bill, and violent crime in key cities has doubled in just 4 years. If you've been feeling like something is off, you're not imagining it. America is shifting faster than most people can keep up with, and the real shock is that the changes aren't slowing down. They're accelerating. 10. What almost nobody wants to admit is that America is slowly drifting into a reality where truth itself is collapsing, not metaphorically, but literally. And the consequences of that collapse are already reshaping the country faster than most people can process. Everywhere you look, something feels off, and it's not your imagination. We are living through the most severe breakdown of shared reality in modern American history. And this isn't just a cultural issue, it's psychological, technological, political, and economic all at once. This is the first era in which no two groups of Americans can even agree on the same set of facts, because the information environment has become so fragmented, so algorithmically weaponized, that the country no longer operates on a unified understanding of events. This fracture is measurable. A 2026 national survey found that 72% of Americans believe the media intentionally lies, 64% believe the government hides most major events, and 41% believe their political opponents are evil, not just wrong, a belief system almost identical to nations experiencing civil fragmentation. And here's where it gets genuinely alarming. The collapse of shared truth is happening at the same time that AI-generated misinformation has exploded by over 900% in just 2 years. Deepfake videos, fabricated political statements, synthetic news anchors, AI-generated crime footage, the average American cannot distinguish real from fake anymore. And studies show that people only need to see a false claim twice before it becomes emotionally true in their mind. This breakdown has consequences beyond politics. It affects how people interpret the economy, crime, health, science, elections, and even their own future. You now have millions of Americans living in parallel realities, each believing the others are manipulated, brainwashed, or malicious. That is the exact psychological environment that precedes mass instability in every collapsed society in history. And the economic fuel underneath this confusion is making everything worse. With 80% of Americans saying they feel financially insecure, and the majority believing the next recession will be systemic, people are primed to believe any narrative that gives shape to their anxiety, even if the narrative is dangerous or unfounded. This is why fringe beliefs, extremist ideas, conspiratorial thinking, and political radicalization are skyrocketing across all age groups. Not just the young or the old. In short, the country is losing its ability to agree on reality, and without a shared reality, you cannot have shared policy, shared identity, shared community, or shared purpose. America was once held together by a common narrative, and whether that narrative was perfect or not, it acted as the psychological foundation for national stability. But that foundation is now cracking under the weight of economic pressure, digital manipulation, political division, and institutional distrust. And when a nation can no longer agree on what is real, what comes next is never peaceful. 9. In a twist almost no one is prepared to confront, one of the most dangerous turning points unfolding in America right now is the rapid militarization of everyday life, not because the government suddenly became more authoritarian, but because the country has become so unstable, so unpredictable, that the boundaries between civilian society and security infrastructure are dissolving right in front of us. This isn't fear-mongering, it's data. In the last 3 years alone, the United States has seen a 312% increase in private security hiring, a 67% increase in gated residential developments, and the proliferation of 14,000 new privately owned surveillance networks installed across major cities. Police departments, already overwhelmed by staffing shortages, some operating at 50 to 60% of required personnel, are increasingly outsourcing patrol duties to private firms, many of which have fewer regulations, less oversight, and more aggressive protocols than sworn officers. And the reason this shift is happening is simple. Crime is not just rising, it's evolving. Carjackings in cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. are up by over 200% since 2019. Retail theft has reached $125 billion annually, and home invasions in formerly safe suburban counties have doubled. But the most alarming trend is the rise in organized criminal networks exploiting economic desperation and digital vulnerabilities groups that operate across multiple states, use encrypted communication, and target entire neighborhoods at once. This has triggered a quiet arms race among ordinary citizens, with firearm sales hitting 16 million units in 2025 alone, many purchased by first-time buyers. Add to this the spread of AI surveillance tools, facial recognition cameras, autonomous drones patrolling neighborhoods, predictive policing algorithms, and America is beginning to resemble the kind of fragmented, semi-militarized society usually associated with developing nations facing long-term instability. But here's the truly shocking part. Experts are warning that as public institutions weaken, private security will increasingly become a luxury resource. Wealthy communities will buy protection. Middle-class areas will struggle. Working-class neighborhoods will be left behind entirely. When safety becomes a product instead of a public service, society stratifies in ways that are almost impossible to reverse. And in the background, a psychologically exhausted population is becoming desensitized to the presence of armored vehicles, tactical gear, and constant surveillance, things that would have been unimaginable on American streets just 15 years ago. The country is drifting toward a future where safety is no longer guaranteed, but purchased, and where the line between enforcement and control becomes thinner every year. 8. Shockingly, one of the most overlooked crises sweeping across America isn't economic, political, or even technological. It's the collapse of physical and mental resilience, a nationwide health breakdown so severe that experts warn the country is approaching a point where the population itself will no longer be capable of sustaining a functional workforce or a stable society. People talk about obesity, stress, anxiety, burnout, and chronic illness as if they're separate problems, but they're not. They're symptoms of a deeper national deterioration. Start with this. Over 60% of Americans now suffer from at least one chronic illness, and 42% are clinically obese, the highest rate in the industrialized world. Life expectancy has fallen to a 25-year low, reversing a century of progress. Meanwhile, antidepressant use has exploded by 70% since 2010, and anxiety medication prescriptions are up 90%. But here's the part no one is talking about: the cognitive decline happening in younger generations. Studies from 2024 to 2026 reveal a disturbing trend: rising rates of memory loss, attention deficits, and early neurological symptoms among adults under 35, driven by sleep deprivation, digital addiction, ultra-processed diets, microplastic exposure, collapsing social structures, and the constant psychological strain of economic precarity. Add to this the fact that only 24% of Americans meet basic fitness standards, and nearly one-third of young adults cannot run a mile without stopping, and you start to see the bigger picture. America's physical foundation is disintegrating, and the economic consequences are devastating. By 2030, experts estimate that national productivity will fall by over $1.2 trillion annually due to health-related work loss, disability claims, and early retirement. Employers are already reporting that they cannot find workers physically capable of performing jobs that were considered normal 20 years ago. The U.S. military has struggled to meet recruitment goals for 9 consecutive years, with 71% of military-age Americans now deemed unfit to serve. This isn't just a health crisis, it's a national security crisis, a labor crisis, a demographic crisis, a societal crisis, a civilization-level warning sign. And what makes this even more terrifying is that the systems meant to respond — healthcare, education, public health, community institutions — are all overwhelmed, understaffed, or collapsing themselves. The result is a population that is living longer in sickness, not health, aging faster than it can be replaced, and becoming mentally exhausted at a scale no country has ever seen in peacetime. This is not sustainable. 7. In a way that should terrify every American paying attention, one of the greatest threats facing the United States right now is the accelerating collapse of institutional competence, a nationwide failure of leadership, expertise, and operational capacity that is pushing every major system closer to chaos, with almost nobody qualified left to stop it. For decades, Americans assumed that no matter how bad politics became, the underlying machinery of government and public administration would still function, that hospitals would stay staffed, agencies would do their jobs, infrastructure would be maintained, emergencies would be handled, and experts would keep the country running. But that assumption is now breaking. Across the board, America is facing a catastrophic talent drain at senior and technical levels. 42% of federal employees will be eligible for retirement by 2028, and 1/3 of state and municipal workers are already past retirement age. Meanwhile, the pipeline to replace them has evaporated. Young professionals want nothing to do with public service. Applications to government jobs have dropped over 55% in the last decade, and critical fields like civil engineering, environmental management, electrical grid operations, and transportation safety are facing shortages so severe that many agencies are operating at half capacity or less. Even worse, thanks to political polarization, scientists, analysts, economists, epidemiologists, cybersecurity experts, and policy specialists are leaving their roles in record numbers due to burnout, harassment, low pay, political interference, and constant public distrust. This has created a nightmare scenario. Massively complex systems, air traffic control, water treatment, food safety, nuclear oversight, emergency response, aviation safety, and disaster preparedness are now being managed by overstretched, understaffed, inexperienced teams who are themselves begging for reinforcements that never come. And it shows. Near-miss aviation incidents are up 63%. The FDA cannot keep up with food contamination outbreaks. FEMA has admitted that the U.S. is now experiencing more emergencies than the system was ever designed to handle. The electrical grid is running beyond safe capacity, with too few specialists to maintain it. And cybersecurity threats have outpaced the number of qualified defenders by over 500,000 positions. A country does not collapse because people stop caring. It collapses because the people who know how to run the system walk away, and nobody replaces them. The United States is becoming a nation of failing institutions run by exhausted personnel hoping the next emergency isn't the one that breaks the whole machine. And unless something changes, that breaking point is coming. This is number 7. 6. Almost unbelievably, one of the most explosive and destabilizing trends unfolding across America right now is the silent disintegration of the middle class, not in theory, not in prediction, but in real time. With economic data so extreme, it resembles the early warning signs of nations that later experienced political revolutions, currency collapses, and mass social upheaval. For most of the 20th century, the American middle class wasn't just an income group, it was the psychological anchor of the nation, the stabilizing force that kept the country cohesive, optimistic, and forward-moving. But today, that anchor has snapped. Between 2000 and 2026, the cost of housing rose 143%, healthcare rose 168%, childcare rose 180%, and college tuition rose 213%, while median wages rose only about 20% in the same period. This is not normal inflation, this is systemic displacement. As of this year, 61% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, 70% cannot afford a home, and 52% say they have zero chance of reaching financial stability under the current economic model. Meanwhile, corporate consolidation has devoured entire sectors, giving Americans the illusion of choice while funneling wealth upward at the fastest rate in modern history. The top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This alone would be destabilizing. But the real flashpoint is the collapse of financial security. Credit card debt has hit $1.4 trillion. Household delinquencies are rising at the fastest pace since 2008. And auto loan defaults have surged to a 21-year high. The average American cannot afford the average American life anymore. And when the middle class collapses, resentment spreads. It becomes cultural. It becomes political. It becomes existential. Countries with strong middle classes tolerate political differences. Countries without middle classes break apart under the weight of inequality. This is why social trust is at a historic low, why political extremism is exploding, why cities are emptying, why young people are refusing to have children, and why millions of Americans say they would leave the country if given the chance. The United States is not just becoming more unequal, it is becoming unrecognizable. A nation where the majority feels economically hopeless is a nation that is already in the early stages of fracture. 5. In a development almost nobody is mentally prepared for, America is quietly entering a financial time frame so dangerous that even economists who once dismissed collapse scenarios as doom talk are now warning that the United States is approaching a structural breaking point the modern world has never seen before. What's happening right now isn't just inflation or high interest rates or federal debt, it's the convergence of all three, hitting simultaneously inside an economy that depends entirely on constant expansion, cheap borrowing, and uninterrupted consumer spending. But here's the nightmare. Those three pillars are now collapsing at the same time. Start with consumer debt. Americans now hold over $17.8 trillion in household debt, the highest in recorded history. Credit card balances just broke $1.4 trillion, and delinquencies are rising faster than they did in 2007, right before the financial crisis hit. Auto loan defaults are at a 21-year high, and for the first time ever, the average new car payment passed $780 per month, which is insane in a country where most people don't even have $500 saved. Meanwhile, mortgage rates hitting 8% have pushed homeownership to its lowest point since the 1960s, creating a generation of permanent renters in a nation that once defined itself by the idea of owning a home. But the darker story sits in the banking system. Commercial real estate is collapsing. Office towers across America are sitting half empty, and $1.6 trillion in CRE loans are about to come due within the next 4 years, many for properties now worth 40 to 70% less than their pre-pandemic valuations. Regional banks, which hold the majority of these loans, are already under stress, and several are showing the same mathematical fragility that triggered dozens of bank failures during the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s. And then you have the national debt over $38 trillion, rising by $1 trillion every 100 days, with interest payments now exceeding defense spending. That is not sustainable. That is the definition of a system nearing failure. But the reason this becomes truly catastrophic is because the entire American economy is built on the assumption that money must stay cheap. When money becomes expensive, everything cracks. Small businesses fail, mortgages stall, investment freezes, layoffs spike, and stability evaporates. For the first time in modern U.S. history, Americans are beginning to realize the truth. The old economic model is gone, the safety nets won't hold, and the future will not look like the past. 4. Disturbingly, one of the most explosive crises unfolding under America's feet right now is the accelerating collapse of the country's physical infrastructure, a deterioration so severe, so widespread, and so underreported that engineers now warn the United States is entering a phase where key systems could begin failing simultaneously, triggering nationwide breakdowns. People complain about potholes or slow internet, but those are symptoms of something far more dangerous, a national infrastructure grid on the edge of systemic failure. To understand how bad it is, look at the numbers. Over 45,000 bridges in the United States are rated structurally deficient, many built in the 1950s and 60s, never intended to handle modern loads. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave the U.S. a national infrastructure grade of C-, and some categories, like transit systems, scored a D-. Water infrastructure is collapsing even faster. 6 billion gallons of treated drinking water are lost every single day due to leaking, cracked, or corroded pipes. Cities like Jackson, Mississippi, and Flint, Michigan are not anomalies, they're previews. The electrical grid is no better. 70% of U.S. power lines are more than 40 years old, and extreme weather events have increased by 300% since 1980, attacking a system that was never designed for this level of stress. Texas nearly collapsed in 2021. California nearly collapsed in 2022. The Northeast nearly collapsed in 2024. These weren't flukes, they were warnings. And when the grid fails, everything fails. Hospitals, water treatment plants, fuel pipelines, communication systems, air traffic control, the banking system, all dependent on uninterrupted electricity. Meanwhile, railroads are so outdated that over 1,100 derailments occur each year, many involving hazardous materials that could devastate entire towns. Interstate highways are crumbling, ports are overloaded, dams are weakening, and the replacement costs have soared to over $4 trillion, money the government does not have, money taxpayers cannot provide, and money investors are terrified to lend. And the reason this becomes a national emergency is simple. Infrastructure is the skeleton of civilization. When it collapses, society does not slowly decline, it rapidly destabilizes. Businesses shut down, supply chains fracture, cities become unlivable. Populations migrate, crime rises, governments lose authority, and once infrastructure fails at scale, rebuilding it becomes nearly impossible. America isn't heading toward an infrastructure crisis. America is already in one, and the public has no idea how close the country is to systems breaking in ways that cannot be fixed. 3. Almost no one realizes it yet, but one of the most dangerous transformations happening in America is the rapid unraveling of social cohesion, not the culture wars, not political tribalism, but the deep psychological fragmentation of the population into isolated, distrustful, increasingly hostile micro-societies that no longer share the same values, beliefs, realities, or sense of national purpose. For generations, America relied on a simple mythos. Even if people disagreed, they still believed in the same overarching story of what the country represented. That myth is gone. Polls from 2025 to 2026 reveal a terrifying landscape. 68% of Americans now believe the greatest threat to the country is internal, and nearly 1 in 3 expects political violence within the next few years. But this isn't just about politics. The split is cultural, generational, economic, geographic, technological, and psychological. Older Americans and younger Americans practically live in different universes, one shaped by physical communities and traditional work structures, the other shaped by digital ecosystems and economic precarity. Rural America and urban America have diverged into two incompatible realities, each convinced the other is destroying the country. Add to that widening racial, class, and ideological divides, and you have a population that no longer sees itself as a unified whole, but as a collection of competing tribes fighting for survival. And then there's the digital dimension. Social media algorithms have turned communication into warfare, elevating outrage, paranoia, victimhood, and misinformation at unprecedented scale. The average American is now exposed to more emotionally distressing content in a single day than their grandparents encountered in a month. And humans simply were not built for that level of cognitive strain. This constant pressure cooker has created a population that is chronically angry, exhausted, overstimulated, and unable to tolerate opposing viewpoints. Even basic social trust, the glue that holds a nation together, has collapsed. Only 16% of Americans say they trust other people, down from nearly 50% in the 1970s. That number is catastrophic. Countries with trust that low typically descend into corruption, instability, and political extremism. And that's the final ingredient. People are no longer choosing ideologies, they are choosing identities. Political beliefs have become lifestyle brands, social groups, peer networks, even surrogate religions. Once politics becomes a replacement for community, the stakes become existential. You no longer disagree with your opponents, you see them as threats. And when a nation reaches that point, history shows that unity becomes nearly impossible without a major upheaval. 2. What's even more alarming and barely being discussed publicly is America's accelerating descent into demographic collapse, a population crisis so severe that it threatens the nation's economy, military strength, social stability, and long-term survival in ways far beyond what mainstream commentators are willing to admit. Here's the reality. America is running out of people. Birth rates have fallen to the lowest level ever recorded, dropping below 1.6 children per woman, far below the replacement rate of 2.1. But the shocking part isn't the decline itself, it's the speed. Since 2007, the U.S. birth rate has fallen by nearly 30%, a drop faster than what Japan experienced during its economic lost decades. And unlike past generations, young Americans aren't delaying children, they are opting out entirely. Surveys in 2026 show that 45% of adults under 35 say they do not plan to have children, citing economic instability, unaffordable housing, collapsing healthcare, climate anxiety, and the belief that America doesn't have a future worth raising kids in. Meanwhile, immigration, the only mechanism that has historically offset birth declines, is weakening as fewer skilled workers want to come to a nation perceived as unstable, expensive, and politically chaotic. And the consequences of demographic collapse are devastating. First, the workforce shrinks. By 2035, the U.S. will have more retirees than workers entering the labor force, a ratio that makes Social Security and Medicare mathematically unsustainable. Second, economic growth stalls. Nations with declining populations inevitably face shrinking tax bases, rising debt burdens, collapsing consumer markets, and stagnating innovation. Third, national security erodes. Recruitment shortages in the military are already at historic highs. 71% of military-aged Americans are unfit to serve, and enlistment rates have fallen so sharply that some branches are considering structural downsizing. Fourth, political polarization worsens as generations fight over dwindling resources. And finally, the darkest outcome, demographic decline, triggers societal pessimism. When a population stops believing in the future, it stops investing in it. This is why cities are seeing record vacancies, why young people refuse to buy homes, why family formation has crashed, and why millions fantasize about leaving the country altogether. America's population collapse is not just a statistic, it is a civilizational alarm bell, and the terrifying truth is that once this spiral begins, no nation in modern history has reversed it. 1. Nothing captures the true scale of the crisis facing America more than this. For the first time in its history, the United States is facing a legitimacy collapse, a complete breakdown in the public's belief that the system itself is capable of functioning, protecting them, or offering a future worth investing in. And once a nation loses legitimacy, everything else unravels with terrifying speed. You can see it everywhere, rippling through every institution, every community, every demographic, every political group. The extraordinary thing isn't that Americans disagree with one another. Disagreement has always been part of the national DNA. What's different today is that a record 84% of Americans believe the system is rigged, 78% believe their leaders don't represent them, and nearly 60% believe the U.S. could face a major societal breakdown within their lifetime. These numbers aren't just bad, they're the kind of numbers you see in nations right before political upheaval, mass protests, or systemic realignments. And the reason they're so dangerous is because legitimacy isn't a law, a policy, or a government program. Legitimacy is psychological. It's the belief that the system is worth participating in, worth trusting, worth obeying, and worth preserving. Once that belief cracks, the country enters a phase where nothing works the way it used to. Elections become disputed. Laws become optional. Authorities lose power. Institutions become irrelevant. Norms disintegrate. People stop following rules because they no longer see a reason to. And when legitimacy collapses, governance itself becomes impossible. The warning signs are everywhere. The justice system is fractured, with different states effectively operating under different legal realities. The federal government is gridlocked to the point of paralysis, incapable of passing basic legislation. Confidence in the media is at historic lows. Trust in science has plummeted. Schools are losing enrollment. Churches are emptying. Public universities are drowning in debt. Even the military, historically the most trusted institution in America, is losing prestige as recruitment collapses and internal ideological battles intensify. Meanwhile, the rise of parallel systems is accelerating. Alternative news ecosystems, alternative currencies, alternative educational pathways, alternative community structures, alternative militias, alternative identity groups, all forming because millions of people no longer recognize the authority of traditional institutions. This is exactly what happens when a system loses legitimacy. People build new systems. And once that parallel infrastructure grows large enough, the old system either transforms dramatically or dies. But the most shocking part is the speed. Legitimacy doesn't erode slowly, it collapses suddenly. History is full of once stable nations that crumbled in a matter of months after their populations collectively decided, this no longer works. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because it was invaded. It collapsed because the people stopped believing in it. And right now, America is showing the exact same symptoms: mass political cynicism, economic disillusionment, institutional failure, generational pessimism, and the widespread belief that the system cannot be fixed from within. This is the real crisis, not the economy, not the crime, not the birth rates, not the polarization. The most dangerous threat America faces is the moment its people stop believing America is salvageable. Because once that belief dies, the nation that depended on it dies soon after. Most people won't take this seriously. Don't be one of them. If this video made you uncomfortable, good. You were supposed to feel something. Because comfort is the reason so many people get blindsided by the world changing around them. America is entering a chapter where only the informed, the alert, and the prepared will make it through without getting crushed. So stay sharp, stay focused, and whatever you do, don't look away now. The next part of this story is already unfolding.